Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. My name is Teriluz Andreu, and I am a partner with Excellent. At Excellent, we specialize in cultural transformation and leadership development. And today with me, it's my colleague, Terry DeBasac and Rebecca Williams. And together, we're going to be sharing with you some great insights and tips on how to facilitate challenging meetings. As leaders, we know that we face this all the time. And as consultants, we do this for many of our clients around the world. So today you're gonna get some insights into what do we do as expert facilitators to help teams go through very challenging conversations, but do so in a way that is constructive and conscious. Terry and Rebecca, you wanna say hi to our participants today?
Rebecca, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Williams. It's so wonderful to be with you. I'm joining you from Atlanta, Georgia, and I am an engagement advisor that works with Excellent, and I'm looking forward to this really important topic that has a deep impact on all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am Thierry de Bessac, calling from Ibiza, the beautiful island and magic island of Ibiza, and a partner at Excellent, and fascinated by dealing and facilitating challenging meetings with top executives or managers around the world. So very pleased to share some experiences with you.
So great, Terry. Thank you, Terry and Rebecca, for joining us. We have a truly global team here today. I'm joining for sunny Miami, Florida. So let's get started. And just a little bit about our intention today and what we would like to share with you is to really give you some best practices in order to prepare, conduct, and debrief challenging meetings as a leader facilitator. And we'll talk a little bit of what it means to be a leader facilitator, even though what we're going to be sharing with you today are also insights and tips that you can use just as a facilitator, even if you don't lead the team. But I know sometimes we're in that situation in which we need to facilitate a challenging meeting, and also we are the leader of a team. And what we're going to provide you is some tips, ideas, and tricks on how to do this more effectively. So at Excellent, we talk about the 3 C's for success, which we call it connection, context, and content. So before we jump into content, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the 3 C's, we want to do a check-in, which is how do we make a connection? So I'm going to ask you to please take your phone, and we don't say this very often when we are doing webinars, but please take your phone and scan the code on the screen, because we would like to see how do you feel coming into the meeting today. And we're going to be showing you, just to make this a little bit more fun, some images that we would love for you to see which one do you identify more with in terms of how you're coming into today's meeting. So just put in the number of the image that best represents how you're coming into today's session. And I'll be curious, Terry and Rebecca, to see which one comes at the top. We use this sometimes with meetings, and I'm not going to spoil it, but we'll share with you which ones do we see more often coming up and showing up in the meetings that we facilitate. All right, let's give it a minute. This is very interesting. So we have a lot of enthusiasm coming into today's meeting. We have about 27% of people that are super excited, and 18% that are in the roller coaster and in the clock crunch. So very interesting. Terry and Rebecca, which ones do you see more often coming up in your meetings?
Rebecca.
You know, I know for me, I'll often see people actually on the road, and the clocks are typically the 2 that I see the most often. It's kind of a blend between the 2, like I'm here for the journey, or oh my gosh, I'm time constrained.
Same, actually. It will be number 3, what I see those days. It changes over time. Obviously, it depends on teams, but what I can see now is many of the leadership teams or teams, completely oversaturated, overwhelmed with meetings and so on. and sometimes quite skeptical about what we want to achieve during that meeting. And as I always say, guys, I love skeptical people because you're going to make this meeting, this difficult meeting, a success. So please feel free to express your skepticism. And by the way, if there is anyone who is cynical, please just leave the meeting. We don't need you.
Yeah, I always say that we always say don't get mad, get curious. So when we have skeptical people in the meeting, those are the ones that really challenge us to lean into that curiosity. So I agree with you. What I typically see it's number 3 and a lot of number 11s. So I'm glad to see that we have a lot of number 10s today, and eager to share that enthusiasm with you as well. And how do we create that enthusiasm also in the meetings that we will be facilitating? So let's get into the content. And you're going to see how we use, for example, these check-ins when we do meetings with our clients and also with groups. And a little bit about Excellent, maybe you have heard from us. There's a great podcast from Tim Ferriss. If you're a fan of the Tim Ferriss podcast, I will highly recommend it. And he recently interviewed Claire Hughes Johnson from Stripe. She's the former COO, and now it's in the board of Stripe, and she has worked with Google and many other different organizations. And if you want to learn a little bit more about Excellent and the work we do, I think that podcast will tell you all you need to know. Basically, we are a culture transformation and leadership development firm. We're global. We're working over 40 countries around the world and work with some of the world's more innovative and larger employers. So we have the great chance to work with many great organizations, and some of the things that we're going to be sharing with you today are some of those tricks and best practices that we use when we facilitate meetings with very smart people. And then we know that sometimes that can be a challenge. So today we are going to be hopefully giving you a couple of ideas that you can use in your own teams. So let's get started then with when we talk about challenging meetings, what do we mean? And why are challenging meetings, why are meetings, these types of meetings difficult? Now, we have conversations and meetings all the time. If your agenda looks like mine, it's full of meetings and conversations. And especially today in our virtual world, a lot of the work happens through meetings. We don't have that luxury of walking down the hallway and just casually talking to people. We need to be very conscious about how do we organize our work. And when we have the situation in which 3 key factors come into play, that's when that meeting may turn into a challenging meeting. That's typically when we have diverse opinions, when we have varying personalities, and also when we have competing interests. So when we have that magical mix of these 3 things, that's typically when we call that meeting challenging or difficult. So
here I might say something, Teddy.
Yeah.
Those same 3 attributes that make a challenging meeting are also what makes a fantastic and very, very productive meeting. I mean, the more diverse are the opinions, the more diverse are the personalities and the leadership styles, and the more you have competing interests, the more you have the opportunity to have really productive meetings.
I agree, Tori, and I think that sometimes we're conditioned to think that conflict is bad, right? Or that debate is bad. And because we either stay away, are avoidant, or we look into winning over, having power over the other person because we want to prevail, right? So what we are going to be sharing with you, to your point, Terry, is how do we use these meetings as a creative force in our organization to drive the change that we need to drive, and also just to get things done. Quite frankly, I think that's the biggest frustration that we see with people, is that we have meetings and we don't get anything done. A lot of talk, but not a lot of action. So let's see how then we can turn these challenging meetings and start approaching them differently. But in order for us to do that, and also to provide you some very good and grounded examples, we would love to hear from you. What are the topics around which you more often have difficult meetings? So again, you can scan the code, take your phone, scan the code, or you can go to menti.com and you can enter 7222-0410. And we would love to hear from you what are the topics around which you have most often difficult meetings, difficult conversations? Let's see what our attendants say. All right. Consultants versus business. That would be an interesting one. Okay. Bias. Project planning, strategy, change. Compensation. Yep, that's a hot topic. Equity. Family priorities. Performance. It's kind of the one that is coming up more often. So priorities, performance, those seem to be very hot topics. Accountability. Yes, agreed with that. I think that that's the one that we see more often, is either when somebody that falls short on their commitment or don't honor their commitment, or when accountabilities are not clear. All right, yep, this is what we see too. This is what we see a lot too in terms of what kinds of meetings are really identified more often as challenging. And I think that if you think about some of those topics, priorities, managing performance, etc., what we see very often is that some of those meetings, we know that we don't come into the meeting not knowing what we're going to be talking about. Actually, we can prepare for those meetings, right? So today we're going to share with you kind of some of the things that can happen before, during, and after, and things that we can do to prepare for those conversations, so we also feel more confident about how we're managing them. And at Excellent, we always say that the key for success, and if we want to obtain exceptional, sustainable results, that combo, there's 3 key dimensions that we need to consider. And we call it the I, the we, and the it. And these 3 dimensions are important because when we are facilitating meetings, we also want to make sure that these 3 dimensions are taken into consideration. So when we talk about the it dimension, we're talking about results. When we talk about the I dimension, we're talking about engagement and integrity. So we're talking about the individual and how is that person being considered from their values and engagement and self-esteem perspective. And from the we perspective, we're talking about that interaction or that interpersonal that needs to happen in organizations. So how are we collaborating? How are we considering our relationships? And how do we do so in a way that shows mutual respect and honors everyone in the room? So today, hopefully, what we're going to be sharing with you is a way of balancing those 3 dimensions when we're facilitating challenging meetings and conversations. So let's move on into when we have to do this. And for me as a consultant, sometimes, I would say, well, it's a little bit easier because I don't have, I have a stake, obviously, in the success of my clients. But at the end of the project, I kind of walk away, right? And the people that are in the room are the ones that continue to stay with the commitments and the conversations that happen there. When we're a leader facilitator, we have a high stake in the result, right? Because whatever happens or is the outcome of the meeting will also reflect on me as a leader and on my results. So today we're going to be focusing on that upper corner, which is when I need to lead the process and also when I'm very much involved in the decision making that needs to happen during that meeting, right? When we are involved in the decision making, but we're not responsible for the process, and when we talk about the process, is how is it going to be that flow of that meeting, how that's going to happen? I'm a participant, right? When I'm just responsible for the process, but the decision, I'm not as involved in the decision making, I'm just facilitating the decision making, I'm more of a meeting facilitator. And that's, for example, if you're, let's say, some of our partners in the project, in a PMO, a project management office, in which I'm helping facilitate an agile project. I am not doing the actual work, I'm just facilitating the process. I'm more of on that meeting facilitator role, and others are kind of making the decisions that are going to be impacting the project. That's an example. When I'm in the lower corner, when I'm not that involved in the process and I'm not very impactful in the decision-making involvement, that's when we say, do I really need to be in that meeting, right? I am not responsible for the outcome. I'm not responsible for the process. So why am I doing there? So I either be an SME, meaning I'm providing a point of view and I'm contributing that way, or I'm a note taker, right? I am someone that may be taking note or helping the facilitator, so I better have a role. And if not, those are the meetings that I say, maybe I don't need to be here. I can excuse myself, okay? So let's go on then and show a roadmap for facilitating those challenging meetings. And I'm going to do a spoiler alert. Our friend Terry here wrote some 3 great articles that summarize a lot of the things that we're going to be sharing with you today. So we're going to walk you around how do we prepare for the meeting, how do we make sure that we're showing up with the right mindset, and then how do we do the pre-work so we make sure that the meeting is successful, share the context, and then move into the content and the actual facilitation, and then what happens after the meeting. So now I'm going to pass it on to Rebecca, who is going to walk us through what can we do before the meeting to ensure that the meeting is successful. So Rebecca?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. So let's talk about this before the meeting. One of the most important things is up front to actually think through what is the purpose of why we're doing this meeting? What is our goal? And so what we like to think about is there are really 3 different types of purpose, and each one has a different outcome. The first is to inform. In a meeting that's designed to inform, our desired outcome is to really ensure that we understand and that we're helping people understand why perhaps a change is happening in the performance process. What is that? Because that was one of the key ones that came out is, what is the goal of the performance process? What is it going to look like? And that might be an informed meeting, as often before the performance process starts, there might be a meeting that says, here's the timeline, here's when you do your self-review, here's when managers do the reviews, this is when meetings will happen, etc. That would be an informed type meeting. There's another type of meeting that happens, which is to discuss or to deliberate, and that goal is to gather input. So people, again, in the performance process mentioned that that was one of the more challenging topics. And so one where we might see this happen is in a calibration, a pre-calibration meeting where we're talking about, here are the ratings, what are we going to do, how do we think this should look? And that might be one where we discuss and we deliberate what we think that's going to look like. And then the final would be to decide. And that's where we have to choose between options. So in a decision like this, perhaps in one of the other topics we had on priorities was one that was big. Maybe in a decision making, we're deciding we can't do everything. What do we want to work on? These are really the 3 key types of meetings. And our goal is to think about what type of meeting am I having and how do I design a meeting around that? So when we're talking with others and our stakeholders, it's working together to figure out what's the goal of the meeting and what are we trying to get based on the outcome. One thing that I mentioned a minute ago is the word, one of the types of meeting is a deliberation meeting. It's to deliberate. And there's 2 topics. There's debate and deliberation. Debate is really around defending your point of view, whereas deliberation is really around a discussion so we can consider different reasons. Earlier when Thierry and Terry were talking, they were talking about the importance of having some conflict in a meeting. A lot of times when people get nervous about conflict, maybe a couple of your stomachs went, ugh, when I said that. What we have to realize is there is intellectual conflict and then there's relationship conflict. And what we're talking about here is intellectual conflict, where I care enough to hear your opinion, so we want to have the opportunity and the time to deliberate. The next thing is we need a decision-making checklist of things that we need to think through. The first, when we talk about defined property rights, it's who has the ability to make which decisions and where. The next is we need clarity on the decision-making process. What is that going to look like? How are we going to do that? Who's going to make decisions, and then how are we going to do it? The next is we need to make sure the right people are in the room to have the property rights so that we can make the right decisions at the time. We also need to ensure explicit understanding so everyone understands what we're talking about, what the expectations are, and then where we're moving from there. The final is we need commitment. Once we make a decision, there's got to be a commitment as to what the next step is. Otherwise, we're just making decisions, but they kind of float off into that land of mystery because no one's actually committed to what we're doing next.
Yeah.
Here, a very quick comment. Since we are talking about before the meeting, what I found absolutely incredible is if you are not clear about the decision-making process, about each topic of the agenda, because you might have 3 or 4 different topics in the same meeting, and each of those agenda item might have a different purpose. One might be just to inform, the other one to deliberate, and the other one to make a decision. But if it is about making a decision, if you don't tell in advance who's going to make the final decision, who is the final decision maker, and how we're going to make this decision, then you have probably the main source of why people are saying, you know what, we were supposed to spend 10 minutes or 15 minutes on this specific topic, and we spent an hour, and then we could not go through the full agenda. Most of the time, it's because it was not clear who's going to make the final decision and how we're going to make the decision. So there are debates and debates and debates where everyone is bringing his or her own opinion because of the lack of clarity of how we're going to make the decision and who is the final decision maker. And it has to be said from the pre-reading, the pre-work, and together with the agenda, not during the meeting. That's my experience.
I'm so glad you oh, sorry, Terry, go on.
No, I was going to add to that. I agree with you, Terry, and I think that sometimes I did, we shared this content with a community of executive women just a month ago, and some people were saying, well, can you get into the content? And I'm like, this is the content. All the work that we do, if we don't have an alignment in terms of how we're going to be making decisions, whether it's going to be consensus, whether it's just informing and someone else makes the decision at the end, it just goes into a fruitless debates, and then the meetings lose focus. So just going through this checklist in your mind before you walk into the meeting, it's going to save you a lot of time, and it's really going to save the people in the meeting a lot of time. So I agree with you.
Yeah, thank you guys. I'm so glad you brought that up because I do think knowing what the final decision maker, who that is and what you're going for, whether it's consensus, whether it's inform, and then somebody makes a decision. I'm so happy you brought that up because it's important to know who that is. As we think about preparing for the meeting, all of this is about working with those stakeholders to identify what is the purpose and the desired outcome? Really, what is the intention of the meeting? You saw up front, Terry talked about an intention for this meeting. So a goal, for example, for a meeting could be, hey, I want to lose 15 pounds in the next 3 months. That's a goal, but the intention is to feel healthy, energized, comfortable in my own body, my clothes to fit for my big upcoming reunion. Whatever that might be, it's to be really clear on why are we here together today? To think about what are some interpersonal dynamics I might need to be aware with those stakeholders. To think about any obstacles or those undiscussables, the elephants that might be in the room that we might need to address. And then also thinking about what are the right time blocks to make sure that we can get through the content in the right amount of time. So what does that look like? Those are all different aspects to think through with the stakeholders. We also need to contemplate as we're going through it, what are our own mindsets going into the meeting? What is my physical and my emotional state? How am I operating? We use the iceberg model to talk about this. And in the iceberg, there's what's visible. That's what's on the surface. Here's my have level. And it's thinking about, here's what I desire. Here's how I'm acting. But below that is a level deeper. And that's that murky level. It's what I'm doing. It's the behaviors that I'm demonstrating. And then even a level deeper are those hidden aspects. It's that V level. It's our values, our beliefs, our mindsets. A lot of times that really gets at our core truth. So let's say I'm calling a meeting and I'm like, Teddy, I need more resources, and I'm like, I've got to hire somebody. And then Terry, we started digging in, and then through it, she discovers that core truth that's really behind it is I'm late on deliverables and I'm not prioritizing well. So we're digging deep and we're looking at what are those values, the beliefs, the mindsets, and being ready to explore yourself to know, how am I showing up that day? What is it that I need? Am I upset? Am I angry? What's in it, so that if I can go in there, I can show up with the right mindset to lead that meeting. And so also helping participants prepare, it's thinking through, putting out there, this is the purpose, this is the desired outcome, and here's the meeting agenda. And then if needed, pre-work. I have an executive I worship, and she will not, that I work with, who she will not accept a meeting if it doesn't have an agenda in the meeting invite, so that she knows, why is the meeting happening, what are the outcomes, and what does it look like. And I actually love that practice. We need to have thought through what our goals are when we set meetings on calendars. And they need pre-work. So that's based on the purpose of the meeting or the key intention. So with that, Terry, I'll hand, Terry, yeah.
Yeah, so, I love to have pre-work and pre-reading for effective meetings, more specifically where they are very challenging. The point being, I don't want to waste our time, guys, to spend time on sharing information, trying to understand the context and so on and so forth. We don't have time for that, and we can do it asynchronously, no? I have, so some clients say, okay, fine enough, fair enough. We can do that a week before, 2 weeks before, and just tell us what we need to do, what we need to read, let us know what you want us to reflect about, and then we would come prepared. And one client who told me one day, you know what, no way, forget it. It is not part of our culture, and to do some pre-work. And I say, okay, why? We just don't have time. We are firefighting every day, and we cannot spend this time. And say, okay, so what do you suggest? And they made a fantastic suggestion that they are using, and very effectively. They say, okay, why don't, when we have a very key meeting where we really need to deliberate, when we really need to make decisions, why don't we have the first 15 minutes of the meeting in silence, where everybody is going through the material, the information material, with this question about what should I think about regarding this material, or what should I share, and what is my reaction, what will be my suggestion, whatever. So they just do it just before, during the meeting, but as an introduction of the meeting in complete silence. It's really cool. So you can take 10 minutes, 15 minutes, not much more, if you don't have too many things to read and to prepare. And it works. It works pretty well. It's really fun.
Love that. That's really cool. So Terry, I'll hand it over to you to talk about what we do during the meeting.
All right, so in the next 30 minutes that we have left together, we'll talk about how do we facilitate the meeting and what do we do at the end. And it's as you can see, this is very similar to what we see in meetings. There's the preparing, maybe longer than the actual doing, but that's what a good facilitator does, right? So in order for us to help create an environment of trust and safety that will help us have the conversations that we need to have in a challenging situation, we need to consider a couple of things. First, that people feel comfortable that they can voice their truth, that they can speak what's really behind what they're feeling and what they're thinking. We also want to make sure that, if you can click again, Rebecca, that everybody feel understood by others. So this is when we talk about listening. So it's not just talking, but listening and also recapping to make sure that everybody felt that they were clearly understood in terms of what they said. Also, that we don't shy away from confrontation and conflicts. We already talked about that, but we can see conflicts as just exposing different points of view and not necessarily having or gaining, right, or winning over the other person, but just presenting opposing points of view and trying to find a solution. And also when people feel fully committed to the final decisions, even if initially they were opposed. And this is something that we actually at Excellent do ourselves, is that sometimes we may have different opinions, but we debate, we talk about things, and then we say, well, can you live with that? And if the answer is yes, we move forward, right? So there's a commitment. And also that there's a pledge and a need in order for us to do this as a team and to see this as a way of continuing to building our trust and building our collaboration and relationships. So moving on to then how do we do this, what we call conscious facilitation. And I mentioned this at the beginning, that we talk about the 3 C's at Excellent: connection, context, and content. And the temptation in many meetings is just to go and jump into the, what are we going to do, right? And what happens then is that you need to backtrack, because there may be some situations that may be getting in the way for people having constructive dialogue. So that's why we do the connection first. Connection is seeing the eye, seeing how is the person showing up into that into that meeting. How are they feeling? Sometimes the reason why a meeting is difficult doesn't have to do anything with the topic that is being debated or discussed. It's because maybe I'm going through a very hard time. I'm distracted because my son is ill, or I am super overwhelmed, or I'm not feeling well. And I have not full concentration on what's going on. Rebecca may think I'm feeling detached, but really I'm just feeling like hell. I'm just making a super human effort to be in this meeting, but I'm just feeling not well. I'm not on my zone. But Rebecca doesn't know that. So if she doesn't know it, she's going to read into the situation, maybe coming from what she thinks, but she's not a mind reader. So that's why doing the connection is so important, because people see seen. And this is what creates that trust, starts building that trust. So the connection, we can do something simple like what we did in this meeting. Do a check-in. How are you showing up today? What's your intention for today's meeting? For me, this meeting will be a success if we, you can get playful with the check-ins that we did with the images this morning if you have a bigger group, or you can make it very personal and do an extended check-in. Actually, we have in our meetings sometimes extended check-ins if we know that the main purpose of the meeting is to build trust, right? And this is a great way of embracing mindfulness. So things like, if you know that people are agitated, I know that this may feel a little bit out of the comfort zone for some people, but it really works miracles, and it takes like 3 minutes to do some breathing exercises, do a little guided visualization. If you don't feel comfortable doing these kind of exercises, there are tons online that you can find and put a little video just to kind of help people get grounded. But it's something just to kind of shift the energy, knowing, especially if you're walking into something that there may be strong emotions in place, right?
I like to insist on the point that when you do the checking for real challenging meeting, and you have some time to address those challenging issues, the question about asking each of them one by one. For me, this meeting will be a success if what? It's magic. It's magic. Number one, because you understand what the kind of perspective they have about the challenge. Here, you can identify the skeptical people and make them your best friends. And at the end of the meeting, as we will see it with the checkout, you can say, okay, how successful were we? Okay. But doing that, what the magic of this is, you put everyone in the perspective of the outcome and not the challenge itself only. So when you say, okay, it will be a success if, let me think about that. Okay, from my perspective, it will be a success if this. And you will see the diversity of expectation, by the way. But once again, everyone is focused on what will be the great outcome of this meeting. And it could be, by the way, you can use it as for a one-on-one meeting or with a group of people, right? So I found it really magic.
I agree. And once you get into the habit of doing check-ins, you'll do it for all meetings, not just challenging meetings. And you're going to see how this can really shift the energy in your team and for yourself as well. Then once we make that connection, we can move into the context. And in the context is just to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what is it that we're trying to do here? What is this meeting for? Do a review of the agenda, and also define some ground rules. And I know that many of you may be familiar with ground rules, but it is very important to see how are we going to be operating as a group for this particular conversation? And that is key, because sometimes we make assumptions in terms of this kind of clears the air a little bit, and also allows each other to be held accountable for how we're going to be facilitating the conversation. Sometimes depending on the timing, you may provide the ground rules. Sometimes you may have the team agree on the ground rules. So you need to be thoughtful about how you want to do that exercise. And we want to share with you, if we move on to the next one, some of the things, some of the trick things that we do in order to facilitate these conversations. So when we talk about ground rules, there's different levels of ground rules. One is kind of how are we, the etiquette of the meeting. So be on time, put away devices if they're not going to be needing them, things like that. We also have ground rules that are related to mindsets. Things like, let's just trust the process, remain curious, let's recognize the struggle, let's recognize that we may have different points of view, let's listen to each other. And then this is something that we do as facilitators a lot, and I love it. I learned this from my colleague Richie Hill, and he used the bulldog meter. And it's when I ask people permission to challenge, because it's pushing people to be a little bit out of their comfort zone. So instead of just being blunt and just going out there, I ask them for permission at the beginning of the meeting of how challenging, how much of a challenger do you want me to be? And I ask them, do you want me to be a lapdog, or do you want me to be a full bulldog pit bull, whatever your preferred dog is, in the level of challenge? Or sometimes I say from a scale from 1 to 10, 1 meaning I'm just going to agree with everything you say, and 10 is I'm going to be super aggressive on my challenge. Where do you want me to be today? Because we have some tough things that we need to discuss. Most teams that I work with say I want to be on a 7 or an 8, right? And I always say, don't worry, I will do it with care, I will do it with love. But that gives me, it kind of opens up the space for me to challenge people when they're stuck, or when they are ruminating, or when they are getting into unproductive mindsets or conversations. So
that's my favorite ground rule when I ask this question. And by the way, when it is a meeting with an offsite of 2 days and so on, where we need really to address some challenging issues as a facilitator, I ask it one by one. Where do you want John to be? Where do you want Catherine to be, etc., etc.? And as you said, Terry, there are some people saying, oh, I want to be at 7, 8, which is the majority. But some people tell you, a 4, 5 might be okay. And last week I had a meeting with an executive committee where the CEO is known to be extremely autocratic. He's always talking first, influencing the rest of his team, and a very command and control kind of guy. And when I asked him the question, he said, with me, on the rate of 0 to 10, I want 11. I said, my friend, I'm not sure this is what you really would like. Yeah. Go ahead. Okay. I say, you said it. And the magic of this has been that there is people never challenge him. He's so autocratic, so command and control, so always imposing, unconsciously, by the way, his point of view, that I was really a bulldog. And the magic has been that at the end of the offsite, his team was doing exactly the same that I was doing with him. So they saw that he was first accepting it. Fair enough, he was really fair with that, but they were not used to do it. Okay, but they saw it was possible. And this CEO, I was really full of gratitude with him. He played the rule, and progressively, every time I say, you know what, I told you, and we agreed that you will be the last one to talk every time we're going to deliberate on something, and every time you are the first. So please shut up and just respect the rule, and so on and so on and so on. But the point is that his team, from this meeting, they decided that they will continue to challenge him, and it was pretty cool.
Yeah,
now,
I agree.
for those, yeah.
And I think a lot of people at the top don't get that challenge very often, right? Mm-hmm. So, but this is something that you can use even if you're not an external facilitator. This is something you can use in your teams, right? and asking for that permission to challenge, I think it's going to be very powerful.
That's a key point, because the question is, how do you want me or whoever is the facilitator to be in this bulldog matter? The second question, and how will you accept to be among yourselves in this bulldog matter? And I think this is quite important, that they decide, okay, I authorize, or we authorize ourselves to be 7, 8 instead of the typical 4, 5, 6.
Yep, agree. And then we want to share with you a couple of other quick tips that can really change the conversation. This is an image I use a lot when I'm facilitating. I actually learned this one from one of our other colleagues, Annabelle Dumlau, in a meeting that we we did together. And one of the reasons why many meetings, and challenging meetings in particular, get derailed is because we may go either too high level or too deep into the details. So I use a lot the image of the helicopter, which means we need to keep the right level of altitude. Sometimes we need to go up. Sometimes we need to go down into the details. And as a facilitator, if we're getting too down into the details, I'm going to ask you to go up. And if you're too high up and we need to have a little bit of more details in order for us to have a more meaningful conversation, I'm going to ask you to go down a little bit. But this kind of helps people visualize. Are we being too up or too down? And what is the right altitude that we need to fly in order for us to have a productive meeting? All right. And then the other one that I want to share with you is the fridge, which I love because it's better than the parking lot. In a lot of meetings, we talk about the parking lot and what happens in things that are in the parking lot. They get parked. They don't move. They get lost. In the fridge, if you leave something there for too long, it spoils. So in meetings, what happens is that we talk a lot, but then there's a lot of action items that we probably don't have the time to address. So what we decide to do is to put them on the fridge. And when we put them on the fridge, that means that we need to assign an owner and a date and a particular action that needs to happen with that, or decide to throw it away because nobody wants to deal with it or don't have the bandwidth to deal with it, but we throw it away as a team or as a group. So using this image of the fridge and the helicopter and the bulldog meter are some of the key things that we use that can really change a conversation and the outcomes of a meeting. So I'm very cautious of time, so I'm just going to move a little bit quicker into our third part, which I imagine is the one that many of you may be curious about, which is the content. So now we established the connection, we did the context, and now we move into the content. And the content is the actual conversation that needs to happen in order for us to get to the results or to the outcomes of this challenging meeting. And this is when we need to balance that part about learning and exploring and discussing with actually committing, right, to decisions. And then establish clear commitments and next steps and close with a checkout. So when we're actually facilitating those conversations and we're actually going there, this is when we need to open ourselves up. And if we did point 1 and point 2 right, point 3 is going to be much easier. So how do we allow that debate and deliberation to unfold, right? First one is that we need to encourage people to clarify. Sometimes what happens many times, I don't know if you have experienced this, is that we may be talking about strategy. But strategy may mean different things to Terry, to Rebecca, and to me. Or we may be talking about purchasing, but we're thinking about different processes that may be involved in purchasing. So clarifying what is it that we're really talking about can really help diffuse an argument, and then focus into really what's at stake and really what we need to debate about. Also, there needs to be some space for diverging. We may have different opinions, different points of view, and we need to allow some time for that diversion to occur. Because if not, what will happen is what Terry was mentioning about his client, that is autocratic, just going to go in, expose the situation, but just say, this is what we're going to do. Yes, no, no debate, right? So allowing some time in the agenda for diversion is important. But at the end, you need to come back together. So that's when we need to say, okay, so here are the 4 options that we explored. So let's commit. And which one do we want to focus on? And let's make sure that people can voice their views and concerns, but at the end, all of us don't need to necessarily agree as long as we commit, right? And we say, okay, I can live with that. It's not, maybe it wasn't my preferred option, but I can live with it. Or this requires more exploration. So let's put a time in which we can commit to finalizing this situation or coming up with a particular action, or maybe this is something that a subgroup needs to explore and come back with a better recommendation to the team, right? But whatever it is, we need to commit to a clear action at the end. And in order for that to happen, we kind of need to push people a little bit out of their comfort zone. So there's many different tools out there that can really help you. And actually, there's a great book that is called Liberating Structures. So if you are curious about it, I encourage you to explore online. There's some great resources out there. But here are some of the techniques that we have used. We're not going to have time to go over them. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about these facilitation techniques, maybe we can have another webinar on facilitation techniques. But here's some in terms of making sure that we have allowed for space. And what we like about these techniques is that it really allows for inclusion, for all the voices to be heard, right? So there's techniques like 1, 2, 4, all, in which people ponder into a challenge or situation individually, then they discuss in pairs, they discuss in groups of 4, and then they come back as a team for a full group debrief. World cafes, in which you rotate different tables and you talk about different topics in order to see what are the common trends, ideas, and opinions, and build upon each other. Pre-mortem exercises are one of my favorite ones. It really provides a lot of clarity and say, imagine a future, a year from now, and we fail miserably in this effort. What went wrong? And people just kind of shifts their points of view. And we can even do some role playing, right? So we can really do some different techniques, and there's more, in order to push people out of their normal ways of thinking and surface those different opinions. And Rebecca, I know that that this is an interesting part, because we can have a great debate, we can have a great conversation, but then what happens at the end in many meetings that you've seen?
Yeah, a lot of times we'll get all the way to the end. People have all these decisions. You're like, wow, great conversation. So who's doing what by when and what's going to happen? And so making sure that we're recording clear action items. And the old legend is there are 5 frogs sitting on a log and one decides to get off. How many frogs are on the log? Well, there are 5. Because making the decision doesn't mean that you're actually going to do it. It's got to be backed up by action. And that's why commitment matters. And so I always get a kick out of that story. So we all want to make sure that we get those commitments at the end, because commitment is a twofold aspect. It's we have a request and then we have an acceptance. So Daddy, will you do this by this date? And the answer is yes or no. Those are really the 2 options. And so we want to make sure that we get a commitment and an answer to that, a request and an acceptance. And then we also end meetings with a checkout. And that checkout, as Terry said, is just as important how people are showing up to understand, hey, she looks super irritated. She must really hate me, I might be thinking. And Terry might be, as Terry said, she might be sick that day. And it took everything superhuman just to show up for the meeting and just to understand that. And checking out is, how are you leaving today? And someone says frustrated, I'm confused. That gives us great information. I loved it. Oh, awesome. We all love to be loved. But really understanding how people are feeling when the meeting ends. But it doesn't stop there. What's also important is after the meeting. What happens at the end? And the end of the meeting is actually the beginning of action. It is just as important how we're showing up as how we leave and what we're doing next. So after the meeting, we've got to take action. We capture those key decisions and commitments. We share with the participants what was agreed on, and then we make sure that there's follow through. So who's the point person? And then when are those commitments going to happen? When is the next meeting? What is that going to look like for how you're going to show up and how you're going to report back? All of this is really key to how we show up in a meeting. So with that, Daddy and Thierry, I wanted to see, like, do you have any other comments before we see what questions we have?
I think we don't have much time left.
One quick thing. If you have questions, please put them in the chat.
Yeah, I think let's go to the questions if possible, because I can speak for hours about more things that we described here. So I think let's go to questions if you don't mind. I don't know, Terry Luce, if you wanted to make another comment.
Yeah, so Terry, I think a good question is what happens, I think a lot of us come prepared for a meeting when people are going to be very vocal, but what happens when people don't speak, right? When they decide to hold back. What do you do in order to engage people? If you were a leader facilitator, not just an external facilitator, what are some of the things that you can do when you know that people are holding back and they're just deciding not to engage? Can you hear me, Terry?
Yes, sorry, I was on mute.
Yeah.
Number one, I take care of who did talk and who did not, or who did talk a lot and who did. And fundamentally, you know me, I'm quite direct. So I'm saying, hey, Tedros, we didn't hear you much. What do you think about that? Or when we ask someone to volunteer to share a perspective, an opinion, a point of view, etc., then I say, okay, is there any volunteer like you, Rebecca, who would like to share his or her opinion, and so on and so forth? So forcing a little bit, and then you realize that people who are a little bit shy, suddenly they have really something to say, and they say it. So for sure, everyone has to talk. It was part of the ground rule. I mean, you have to speak your truth, you have to raise your hand, and you have to participate. You are a co-facilitator of this meeting. And what you're going to get is what you're going to put on the table. So just forcing people to talk.
I think to that point too, Terry, and this is a lot about inclusion, it's that we all have different styles, right, in terms of how do we come across, or we may be carrying different experiences from past situations. So having that, especially if you're working with people that need to think about things before they can express their opinion, making that space for people to do that individual reflection, and then having a way in which people can share, I think that's a game changer for a lot of people. So structuring the conversation in a way that everybody needs to express or voice their opinion, I think it's very key.
Yeah, I had the experience a month ago with someone who was really quiet, not sharing opinions for different reasons, and it was due to a very strong personality issue. And then I forced him to express something. And he said, I need to reflect. And he was the kind of guy who really needs to think about. I said, you know what? We have all the time you need. And I said, you know what? We're going to think, reflect, and we're going to wait for you. And I can tell you, it lasted at least a couple of minutes. It's very long, a couple of minutes of silence. Someone wanted to talk. I said, no, sorry, excuse me. Let him reflect. And this person, what he shared was absolutely huge in terms of contribution. It was a completely different perspective than the others had so far. So as you said, give the time to people to think the way they think. Give them the space, give them the opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. So I know we're kind of at the end. So thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Terry, for the great insights. And as we said, the checkout is as important as the check-in. So we would love to hear from you and hear what was your biggest takeaway from today's session. So if you can please scan the code, if you're still with us, and share with us kind of what was your biggest takeaway from today's session, I would really appreciate it. You can go to menti.com 7222-0410. And while you do that, we also want to let you know that we have some great resources for you. Terry wrote 3 great articles that highlight some of the things that we've been talking about today. So if you attended today, you will be receiving some of that information from us in the next few days, along with a recording of the session, in case you want to share this with other people in your organization. And we also are here. If we can help you in any way, you can contact me. We would love to hear from you. contact us through LinkedIn, and we would love to hear from you. What do you thought about today's webinar, and also ideas for other webinars that we may do in the future. So with that, I don't know, Rebecca and Terry, do you have any other closing remarks before we say goodbye to our friends?
No, thank you all.
Thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for being involved in the Mentimeter, and best wishes as you facilitate more meetings going forward. I hope these help.
Yeah, we would love to hear from you. So please stay connected and let us know what you think. Thank you all.
Thank you.